Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, to put your name and your organization if you want. Most of y'all are coming in on mute, just a heads up. That way Nora and I can do most of the talking here today. And Nora, if you want to go ahead and pull up the slides, we can go for it and get started.
Sure.
All righty, everyone. Good morning once again. And as you can probably see, we're introducing ourselves in the chat, so feel free to put your name and your organization. We love hearing from you all. I want to welcome you all to After GiveNOLA Day, how to turn a 24-hour giving event into 365 days of donor engagement. We've done this webinar. You can go to the next slide, Nora, because I'll introduce myself too. So that's me. Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Craig. I am the Nonprofit Leadership and Effectiveness Associate here at the Greater New Orleans Foundation. And I work with nonprofits like y'all to get you signed up and going for GiveNOLA Day. If you've emailed the givenola@ganoff.org email address, there is a very high chance that you spoke to me. We do have other staff members on it as well, but I am the one probably answering it the most often. And we're really excited to have you here today. We've done this webinar in the past. I think we did it in 2019. And it's a really popular topic. You know, you go to this great effort of GiveNOLA Day, and then once May 5th or the day after GiveNOLA Day rolls around, you're like, now what? What do I do? I have these donors and how do I keep them around? So that is why we created this webinar, and why, sorry, somebody was saying something, but why we created this webinar, and we really want to give you guys the tools to keep those donors for many years to come. You can go to the next slide, Nora. So I'm just going to briefly cover some housekeeping and technology. For those of you that need it, we do have closed captioning in this webinar. So if you click the CC button in your bottom control panel, it's usually at the bottom of your screen, it'll give you the option to show a subtitle or hide the subtitle. And then if you are using those subtitles, you can adjust the caption size to what you need. You can go to the next slide. And then all of you are entering in on mute. We ask that you use the chat to submit any questions, and Nora will stop intermittently throughout our presentation and we'll take some questions. And we also, you know, obviously there's always internet issues about, so we do want to let y'all know you can dial into the number on the screen with the webinar ID, and that would allow you to listen into the presentation if your internet fails. And last but not least, I will send out the recording and the deck after this session. You can go to the next slide if you don't mind, Nora. And so now this is the fun part where I get to introduce Nora. Nora Ellertson is the founder and CEO of the Funding Seed. As a fundraising practitioner, she's raised money for environmental, human rights, and civil liberties causes through grassroots fundraising, major donor development, fundraising events, grant writing, and other fundraising activities. Since founding the Funding Seed in 2010, she has worked with over 80 nonprofit agencies to help them develop the resources they need to thrive. Through the Funding Seed, Nora applies the philosophy to teach a person to fish and they will have food for a lifetime to fundraising, with the goal of helping organizations to develop strong skills that will make them successful for the long term. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nora, and she will lead us through our webinar today.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to Greater New Orleans Foundation for asking me to facilitate this workshop and for thinking to host this workshop. I know that this is a topic that is important to so many organizations, and also that it can be kind of hard to make time for. So thank you also to everybody who's here today for taking the time to really invest in your organization and your fundraising. Just to reiterate a couple of the kind of housekeeping items before we get started. You know, I really love for these types of workshops to be interactive and collaborative. We're going to have an opportunity for you to work with individual worksheets during the workshop today. You know, sort of the idea that when you hit that leave meeting button, that you're going to have some concrete ideas for immediate next steps that you can use and put to work right away to develop your own fundraising and your GiveNOLA Day strategy. Also, we want to make sure that any questions that you have or comments that you want to share during the workshop, that we have the chance to address them. So please, you do not have to hold your questions until the end. I would really encourage you to, as soon as you have a question or a comment that you want to share, like Kristen said, just go to the chat button. And if you're still kind of getting yourself familiar with Zoom, I never like to make any assumptions about where folks are at with Zoom. If you go down to the bottom of your screen and the little chat bubble button that says chat, you can click that button and add any questions or comments there. And we're going to kind of keep that as like a parking lot. And then at a couple of points during the workshop, we'll conversation, and Kristen is kind enough to be willing to share those questions with the group, and we'll take a chance to tackle them. I also, before we get started, just want to kind of take a minute of pause here and just acknowledge, over the weekend, you know, we witnessed the killing of Dante Wright. This is coming on the heels of a lot of violence against Black people, Asian American people, racially motivated violence. And this is all, you know, we're sort of witnessing this 13 months into the reality of living and working during a global pandemic. And so I just want to kind of acknowledge this before we get started, because our workshop today, it's going to be really practical. We're going to be talking about, you know, concrete, you know, best practices for fundraising, which I know is incredibly important for every organization that has taken the time to be here today. And also, you know, if you are coming into this space not feeling like you have 100% mental or emotional bandwidth right now, that is totally fine. And I would say even that's a normal response to be having. So what that means for our time together today, I just want to put this offer out there to everybody who's in the workshop today, that if you at any point feel like you need to take a break, take a break. If you feel like you're kind of spacing out a little bit and maybe you're not absorbing the content as much as you'd like to be, that's totally fine. As Kristen said, she's going to be recording the workshop, so you'll always have the chance to listen back to anything that you feel like you might have missed. And also, I'll just put the offer out there. My email address is Nora, N-O-R-A, @thefundingseed.com. It's also on the last slide. If you get to the end of this workshop and you feel like you missed something, you know, regardless of kind of where you're at mentally today, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love working with organizations on their fundraising. I love working with organizations on their GiveNOLA Day plans. And I also just recognize that this is a really hard time for a lot of folks to be doing this work. So I'd love to be a resource to you if you have other things that you kind of leave this workshop still wanting to talk about a little more. So with all that said, I'm going to move on to our agenda for today. So there are actually a bunch of things that we're going to be talking about. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is a little bit about why organizations are participating in GiveNOLA Day, and maybe why your organization is choosing to participate in GiveNOLA Day. Second thing that we're going to talk about is the donor cultivation cycle, which is a process of building strong relationships with people who might give to your organization on GiveNOLA Day, and then hopefully continue supporting your organization after GiveNOLA Day is over. Then we're going to talk about post-GiveNOLA Day interactions with your supporters. So that's going to kind of fall into two categories. It's the immediate and personal thank you for each person who donates on GiveNOLA Day, and then providing meaningful updates to everybody who contributes to your organization. And then at the end, we'll have time for, again, questions and next steps that we haven't addressed already. Like I mentioned before, we are going to have a worksheet that you're going to be working with throughout the workshop. So again, the idea with that is that you leave the workshop today, you're going to have some really clear next steps that you've laid out for yourself. You kind of know once you hit the leave meeting button exactly what you're going to be doing next. So let's get things started. So first thing, I know this is kind of the big question for a lot of people who are trying to navigate nonprofit fundraising right now, is just where are we at as of April 13th, 2021, in particular when it comes to the type of fundraising that we do on GiveNOLA Day, which is fundraising from individual donors. So I'll just share with you a little bit about what the kind of most recent data and research is telling us about fundraising from individual donors. So the first thing, we'll just start kind of back about this time last year. So as I think a lot of folks are aware, GiveNOLA Day is not the only community day of giving that happens in the country. There are communities all over the United States that host these sort of 24-hour community days of giving, where lots of organizations participate at the same time and collaborate to raise funds. And when the pandemic first started, and the shutdowns first started in March of 2020, that was right around the time that the first of those 2020 giving days were happening. And so what happened is that in sort of the immediate first few weeks, when the shutdowns were first starting, when people were really kind of like at, the most uncertainty, I would say, about what was going to be happening with the economy, the communities that happened to have their giving days scheduled for those first couple of weeks saw a very slight decrease in funds raised between 2019 and 2020. So a decrease, but a very slight one. And then once it got into the beginning of April, community days of giving over and over and over again, we're seeing significant increases in the amount of funds raised for organizations that were participating. And that was true of GiveNOLA Day, which last year actually kind of extended over the course of a month. Greater New Orleans Foundation opened up giving from the beginning of May to the beginning of June. And it was a record-breaking year here in New Orleans for GiveNOLA Day as well. Throughout the course of 2020, and I'm sure there are folks on this call who were certainly feeling a lot of uncertainty about what fundraising was going to look like for them. That was kind of the big question for a lot of organizations, is how are we going to, continue to inspire people who care about our mission to invest in us, even with all of the kind of uncertainty that's happening in the world right now. So now that we're in April of 2021, we have the benefit of having like a full year's research. And so the people who spend their time really analyzing the fundraising data across the US, they've had enough time to kind of get a good analysis. And what we saw is that actually over the course of 2020, even with all of the predictions about how fundraising was going to take a decline last year, even with all those predictions, individual giving to nonprofit organizations actually increased in 2020. And in particular, the biggest jump was in donations under $250. So that kind of section of individual giving to nonprofits saw almost a 20% increase in 2020. The reason that's important for us to know about for GiveNOLA Day is that if you've ever participated in GiveNOLA Day before, you know that most of the donations that are made on GiveNOLA Day are smaller donations. So Kristen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the statistic most years is that about a third of all donations are given at the $10 minimum donation level. So that statistic about that being the biggest increase in individual giving in 2020 is really important for all of us to keep in mind as we think about fundraising on GiveNOLA Day in 2021. And, you know, in particular, I would say if you're feeling any kind of hesitation right now about should we be raising money and is this going to be successful? Are people going to want to give right now? What the data is showing us is that it's very likely to be a successful year for fundraising for organizations that really want to invest in a GiveNOLA Day strategy. So that's where we're at. Again, questions or comments, feel free to put those into the chat and we'll address those a little bit later. So the next question to think about is for GiveNOLA Day specifically, why do organizations participate in GiveNOLA Day and why does your organization participate in GiveNOLA Day? And if you have a reason or more than one reason why your organization is participating in GiveNOLA Day 2021, I would invite you to put that into the chat. I would love to see what your motivations are. I'll also say if your first instinct is to say we do GiveNOLA Day because our board says that we should do GiveNOLA Day, maybe think about why does your board think that you should be doing GiveNOLA Day? So, you know, what are your goals? What are your intentions? You're clearly investing time and energy in making GiveNOLA Day something that your organization prioritizes. So what are the reasons why you're doing it? So as folks are putting that into the chat, I'll share what I have heard from the organizations that I've worked with on GiveNOLA Day over the last almost 8 years now. There's that it sort of breaks down into two categories. So the first category is the immediate impact, and the second category is the long-term impact. And as I'm going through these, please feel free to keep sharing into the chat because I would really love to hear what your motivations are for doing GiveNOLA Day. So the short-term benefits, let's start with that. This is, I think, the most obvious one. The short-term benefit of participating in GiveNOLA Day is to raise immediate funds, generate donations that you can use. You know, for most organizations, this is going to be unrestricted funding, which is the thing that most of our organizations need the most, and that those funds, we can put them to use almost immediately. So that, I think, for many organizations is like a leading driver. Here's what I want to encourage you to also think about, and I'm guessing if you registered for a workshop that's about engaging with donors year-round, you're probably already thinking this way anyway. And that's the long-term benefits. And there's so many long-term benefits for getting involved with an event like GiveNOLA Day. So the first thing is that it's an opportunity to engage some of your most passionate supporters, people who always show up to volunteer, people who never miss an opportunity to donate, people who are talking with their friends and family about how incredible your organization is. It's an opportunity to engage with those people as ambassadors to your organization, which then leads to increased financial support because you have people who are talking about how your organization is great and how more people should be giving to your organization. And that means that you're reaching new networks of prospective donors. So that's one great long-term benefit. A second great long-term benefit is that it's an opportunity to retain your past donors. So maybe people who gave to your organization if you did GiveNOLA Day in 2020, or if you did an end of year campaign last fall, it's an opportunity to retain those supporters and ask people to give their next donation. It's an opportunity to recruit new donors, again, not just for that short-term benefit of raising immediate funds, but also ideally to transition a lot of those folks into ongoing long-term supporters. And then the last thing is to lay the groundwork for more funds to be raised in the future, whether that's an end of year campaign that you're doing this fall, if you're thinking ahead to next GiveNOLA Day, if you're thinking about other times when you ask people to give, like either at a fundraising event or other special campaigns that you run, those are all long-term opportunities to raise funds through GiveNOLA Day. And oops, sorry, didn't mean to backtrack there. It looks like we've got a bunch of participation in the chat here. Thank you so much, everybody who shared your reasons for giving or for participating in GiveNOLA Day. We do it to bring awareness to workforce development, so sort of like helping to boost the visibility of the cause that you're working on. So that's a great reason to do GiveNOLA Day. It's a great way for folks who don't have a ton of extra cash to feel like their donations make a difference, so that $10 really makes an impact on GiveNOLA Day. I think that's a great reason for participating in GiveNOLA Day. It'll help us to fund our foundation for scholarships and send young women to college. So I think all of these are incredible motivations for participating in GiveNOLA Day. And so as we're talking about kind of how we make all this happen during our workshop today, I want to encourage you to really think about both of those things. Think about the short-term benefit, which I know is the thing that's probably front of mind for most people right now, is just how do we raise as much money as possible during the giving window of GiveNOLA Day. And at the same time, also be thinking about that long-term strategy and the long-term benefits of having a successful GiveNOLA Day. So, so next we're going to talk about the donor cultivation cycle. And I know that there are some folks who are participating in the webinar who have done other trainings with me and with the funding seed before. So if that's the case, you're probably already familiar with this donor cultivation cycle. This is not something that I invented. People who have been working in the nonprofit and fundraising sector for much longer than I have, and who are, maybe even a lot smarter than I am, have come up with this idea of how you think through the process of building really strong relationships with your supporters, not just to inspire them to give one time on an event like GiveNOLA Day, but really to be long-term supporters of your organization. So the donor cultivation cycle is in 5 steps, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of these steps entails. The first step of the donor cultivation cycle is to identify. This is the point in the process when you determine that a particular person or a group of people, and when I say a group of people, I mean like this could be your volunteers, or if you're a youth development organization, maybe it's parents and family members of youth that are in your programs. So either like a particular person or a group of people might consider giving to your organization if somebody were to ask them to give. So GiveNOLA Day comes around, somehow they, maybe they see it on your social media, or somebody that they know asks them to donate to your organization, and that person or that group of people might consider giving. So that's step 1. Step 2 is cultivate. People, when they're working in fundraising, sometimes like to joke that cultivation is like dating, because it's when everybody's kind of getting to know each other a little bit better. So this can happen because somebody is receiving your newsletter. So maybe they're seeing like program updates from your organization. Maybe they know somebody who's on your board or on your staff. So they're just kind of hearing about the organization like organically in that way. Hopefully your organization is also learning about that prospective donor. So maybe you're, paying attention when that person has a question, or you're looking at, okay, when we send an email out that's on this topic, it has a higher open rate than other emails that we send. So that gives you some kind of information about the people that you're cultivating as prospective donors. Then the third step is to ask. This is the part of the cycle, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's when you ask that person that you've identified and cultivated a relationship with to consider giving to your organization. This is also what we usually think of when we envision fundraising, right? We think about asking people to give money to our organizations. I really want to emphasize here, ask is one step in that 5-step donor cultivation cycle, and it is important. You have to do it. But the thing about the donor cultivation cycle is that what we learn is that it's really more about the other points in the cycle, because by the time you get to the point where you're asking somebody to give to your nonprofit, really you want them to be kind of bought in already. Like you don't want it to be like a hard sell, right? Because you want them to sort of already be confident that your organization is doing good and important work, and they trust the people who are working there. And so that's kind of the hard work. And then by the time you get to the ask, it's almost sort of, you kind of want it to be like a formality. Like you do have to remind the person, we'd love to have your support, and here's the link to donate. But the really kind of more labor intensive part of the work is already done. So then the 4th step in the donor cultivation cycle is to thank everybody who donates to your organization on GiveNOLA Day or any other time that you're asking them to give. You want to make sure that you personally, immediately, promptly thank them for that donation. And then the 5th and final step in the donor cultivation cycle is to update. So this is the part of the cycle where you're keeping the person kind of in the loop with the work that your organization is doing, helping them to really feel like they're involved and a part of the organization. They understand the impact of their gift. Now, I said that's the final step in the donor cultivation cycle, but there kind of is no final step. You'll notice that this is a circle that we're looking at here. So what you really want to be doing when you're really investing in individual donor development is you're continually going through the cycle. So you identify prospective donors, cultivate relationships with them, ask them to give. Some portion of those people who you ask are going to say yes. So those people, you immediately thank them, you update them and keep them in the loop about what your organization is doing. That then gives you permission to ask again when, let's say, it's time for your end of year campaign. And because you thanked and updated, that person is statistically a lot more likely to give a second donation when you ask them to give that next time. So then they give and you thank them and then you update them. And then that gives you permission to ask them again on GiveNOLA Day next year. And again, statistically speaking, now they're even more likely to give another donation. So this is where fundraising and in particular individual donor development really becomes very efficient because you're increasing the rate of retention of those donors. So you don't have to do all the hard work over and over again of identifying completely new prospective donors, introducing them to the organization, everybody getting to know each other, and like doing the more challenging first time that you're asking them to give. You just have to do a lot less of that because you have more people who are just already sort of bought into what your organization is doing and already feeling like, you know, they've got a relationship with your organization and they're really committed to what you're doing. So that's the donor cultivation cycle. So here's what that looks like. This is just like really basic back of the envelope math here. So forgive me if this like just seems a little basic, but I find sometimes it's helpful to think about in terms of like actual dollars. So let's say just for example, that your organization this year on GiveNOLA Day raises $5,000 through 100 donors with a $50 average gift. Maybe your organization has a goal that's more or less than that, but let's just say, you know, for instance here, if you retained 25% of those donors for GiveNOLA Day 2020, which is actually pretty typical for first-time donors. So if all of those 100 donors were first-time donors to your organization, the national statistic is about 25% donor retention for first-time donors. So that would mean that you would have 25 of those 100 donors who give again same time next year. So you're only raising $1,250 from those previous donors. So what that means is that just to break even with what you, or to match what you raised during the previous GiveNOLA Day, you're going to have to find 75 new donors to offset the 75 that you lost. Now, if we up that to 50% donor retention, then you've got 50 donors who are collectively giving $2,500. So your work becomes just a little bit easier. And then if you have 75% donor retention, that means you have 75 donors. You're now raising $3,750 just from last year's donors. So again, your work becomes just a little bit easier next year. Now let's look at, again, basic back of the envelope math here. What happens when you both retain and then upgrade more of your GiveNOLA Day donors? So upgrade, retention is the percentage of donors who gave last year and then give again next year, or who gave last year and then give again this year. So year over year retention. Upgrade means that people are increasing their donation amount. So let's say you're doing both. So let's say again with 25% retention, but a $10 average gift increase. Now you've got 25 donors who are collectively giving $1,500. Let's say you do a little bit better. Let's say you have a 50% donor retention and a $15 average gift increase. Now you've got 50 donors, but they're collectively giving a lot more. It's $3,500. Then let's say you have 75% donor retention and a $20 average gift increase this year to next year. Just through your previous donors, your organization would raise more money. Even though you've lost some donors, there's always going to be some amount of donor attrition. But just from the donors that stuck around last year to next year, you're going to end up raising more money, which means that any new donors that you bring into your organization, that's kind of going to be lagniappe for your organization. So this is really what we're striving for. Like what we want for as much as possible for all of our organizations is to be in that last line there of retaining as many donors as possible and upgrading as many donors as possible. That happens when you do the donor cultivation cycle. Because really what it comes down to for any type of fundraising, and also for fundraising on GiveNOLA Day, is that it's all about building those relationships. That's what leads to retaining and upgrading more of your donors. And one thing that I often ask people to think about is, like, if you just think about the best relationships that you have in your own life, you know, your best friend who you've known for decades, or, you know, your closest family member or your spouse or partner, the people that you feel a really close connection to. You know, when you think about what it takes, the work that it takes to make those relationships really strong, it means kind of consistently showing up for each other. So it means not just like in the big moments when somebody really needs something. That's important too, but it also means like sending a text message because you were just thinking of the person. It means sending a birthday card. It means calling them up when you know they've had kind of a crummy day, and it means them showing up for you when they know that you've had a great day. And it's like sort of the little moments that lead to having those strong relationships. And we need to carry that over into our fundraising. So not just communicating with our donors when it's GiveNOLA Day and we want them to donate, but also the other 364 days of the year, thinking about, okay, what's our communication looking like? How are we conveying our gratitude? How are we conveying the impact of that person's support? How are we helping them to feel a closer connection to the work that they're investing in? That's the thing that really leads to, again, more retention, more upgrading of your donors. And also it helps your organization to develop these incredible networks of like actual allies and people who are really committed to the long-term success of the work that your organization is there to do. So that's kind of the on-ramp here. So now we're going to get into like the nitty-gritty specifics of what it takes to actually make this work on GiveNOLA Day. So the first thing that I want to ask you to do, again, when we're thinking about that donor cultivation cycle, remember the first step there is to identify your prospective donors. So for GiveNOLA Day, it really depends on your organization who you define your prospective donors to be. But I find for most organizations, it's some combination of people who are already following you either on social media or maybe they're on your email list. So if you're going to be doing a lot of asking by sending out emails to your email list or by posting on social media, sort of naturally that means that you've identified those people who are following you on those platforms as prospective donors. You also might be thinking about the friends and family of your staff members, your board members, your volunteers, individuals and families that are in your programs, and the other ambassadors to your organization. So ambassadors, this is a word that you're going to be hearing a lot more during the workshop today. It's like the people who are amplifying the message of your organization, either on GiveNOLA Day or at other times of the year, the people who are real believers in the work that your organ does, so much so that they want to broadcast out their support to everybody who they know, who they think also would be interested in the work that your organization is doing. So those might be some prospective donors. Your GiveNOLA Day donors from last year or the year before, any other day that you've, and any other year you've done GiveNOLA Day. Your volunteers, people who have been involved with your programs for some organizations, not for every organization, but I've definitely worked with nonprofits that, you know, alumni or even current program participants absolutely are people who are considered to be prospective donors. You know, maybe family members of those individuals. I've worked with a lot of youth development organizations that their family members are some of their most enthusiastic donors and some of their most enthusiastic fundraisers. So those might be some of your prospective donors. If you have major donors, maybe you're asking them to consider making their major gift during GiveNOLA Day. And then I find for a lot of organizations there, it's just sort of like, depending on where and how you do your work, you might have other kind of pockets of individuals, people who you know are likely to give to your organization if asked. So I want to ask you to, as we're kind of going through these next couple of slides here, really think about who have we as an organization identified as our prospective donors, or maybe people we haven't talked about as prospective donors yet, but that we really should be thinking about asking to give on GiveNOLA Day. And every time you think of either a specific person or like you see on this slide here, a group of people, write that down, because you're going to want to have a strategy to communicate with those people both on GiveNOLA Day itself and also over the next couple of weeks leading up to GiveNOLA Day. So once you've done that, then remember the second step in the donor cultivation cycle is to cultivate. And so this is the part of the process when people are kind of getting to know each other a little bit better. And in particular, for people who might be newer to your organization. Like, let's say, for example, that one of your strategies for GiveNOLA Day is going to be to ask your board members to reach out to their own networks and ask people to give. Well, those friends and family of each of those board members, they may or may not already be familiar with your organization. So it might help to have a little bit of cultivation that could happen over the next couple of weeks before we get to GiveNOLA Day. And remember that scheduled giving actually opens a week from today on April 20th. So really even cultivation that might have to happen in the next week that helps to foster those really strong relationships with your donors and prospective donors. And also thinking back to, like, are there going to be people who you're asking to give on GiveNOLA Day this year that maybe have donated once or more in the past, but you haven't really been in close contact with them. And so, you know, you've got this kind of big gap of communication. If they gave in December, maybe you did like a Giving Tuesday campaign, and they haven't really heard from you in January, February, March, or April. And then you get to May and you're suddenly asking them to give again. Well, you know, you kind of have like this little window of time before that next ask happens, when you might be able to do a little bit of work to foster some of those strong relationships. So the question is, what can you do now, like ideally within the next week, to help foster some of those relationships with your donors and prospective donors? And also, in addition to that, if you're going to have ambassadors on behalf of your organization who are reaching out to their own networks and people who they know and want to encourage to give to your nonprofit, are there things that you need to do to cultivate relationships with them? So, you know, do they feel, if it's like volunteers, do they feel appreciated? If they haven't been able to be on site with you for the last several months, have you been in touch with them anyway? You know, or has it been kind of radio silence? So really thinking about, like, are there things that we can do to reconnect with people who we want to be involved in our GiveNOLA Day campaign, so that when GiveNOLA Day comes around, they do feel that sense of connection. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask Kristen to put into the chat box, there's a PDF of a worksheet that we're going to be working with over 3 different exercises during the workshop today. So you'll see that come into your chat as a file in just a minute. Open that up and you'll see in that file that there are 3 boxes. One that's up at the top by cultivate, one that's down in the lower right by thank, and one that's in the lower left by update. All we're going to focus on right now is that first box, that cultivate box. And what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to take a couple of minutes to pause here. And once you have that PDF opened up, I want to ask you to think about, are there specific things that you can do in the next 1 to 2 weeks that help to reconnect with your prospective donors and prospective ambassadors before you ask them to give on GiveNOLA Day? So you can see on here, there are a couple of examples on your screen. So for this organization, they're saying that this month they're posting weekly client testimonials on social media. They're sending those same testimonials out as an email sometime during this month. So they're not like creating totally new content. They're just sort of copying and pasting some of it into an email. And then they're also asking their ambassadors to send a GiveNOLA Day save the date email to their contacts, so that when GiveNOLA Day happens, they've already kind of had a little bit of exposure to the organization and to the idea of GiveNOLA Day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the screen share here. What I usually like to do when we have an activity like this is to put on a little bit of music, both so that you have some background noise and so that you have a sense of how much longer you have to work. So this is going to be about 2.5 minutes. If you don't like having sound in the background, you can feel free to turn your volume all the way down and just keep an eye on the time. It'll be about 2.5 minutes, and then we're going to come back to the main group here. So everybody hold tight.
You better think about what you're trying to do to me. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. Let's go back, let's go back, let's go way on the way back when. I didn't even know you, you couldn't have been too much more than 10. I ain't no psychiatrist, I ain't no doctor with degrees, but it don't take too much time to see what you're doing to me. You better think about what you're trying to do to me, yeah. Think, let your mind go, let yourself be free. Oh, freedom, 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 oh, freedom.
Okay. So let's see, Kristen, can you just repost the worksheet one more time for folks that may have missed it? We are going to revisit it a couple more times. I just got a private chat from somebody who wasn't able to access it.
All right.
Yeah, one more time, thanks. And if you go, for folks who weren't able to find it, just click that chat bubble down at the bottom of your screen, and it'll open up the kind of chat dialogue on the side of your screen, and you'll see a PDF from Kristen Craig that you can just click the download, and it will open up that that worksheet there. And if you prefer to not, it's an editable PDF, but if you prefer to not work with the PDF, you can always just jot down your own notes on a Post-it or a piece of paper and just kind of label them. This is my cultivation plan. And then next we're going to get into the thank you and the updating plan. So that's another alternative there. So thanks everybody for taking the pause to do that. If you have an idea that you're feeling really good about, that you're going to use to engage with some of your prospective donors and prospective ambassadors over the next couple of weeks as a cultivation strategy, please do put that in the chat, because I would also love for folks to get ideas from other nonprofits that are participating in the workshop today. So, you know, I'd encourage you to share generously if you're able to do that. So next, I haven't seen any questions come into the chat yet, so I'll just remind people that if you're having any questions or comments that you want to share, please feel free to put those in there. I'm really grateful for everybody who has shared in the chat your reasons for doing GiveNOLA Day and other things that you're working on at your organization. And don't forget to also put in other questions or comments that you want us to address. So next thing we're going to do is talk about the actual stewardship process. So let's imagine, you know, we'll kind of fast forward in our brains. So we've identified our prospective donors. You've cultivated relationships with them. You've had a little bit of communication with them before GiveNOLA Day. It's April 20th. Online giving opens up. The next 2 weeks, people are donating to your organization. Tuesday, May 4th is GiveNOLA Day. All of the excitement around GiveNOLA Day is happening. Your organization totally flies through all of your incredible fundraising and donor acquisition goals. And so now it is either the day after GiveNOLA Day, or maybe it's, like noon on GiveNOLA Day when you've had all of these donors who have been giving to your organization. So now we're going to talk about what happens after those people give. So we're not saying anything about how you're asking people. This is just about once people have already donated to your organization, what are the next couple of steps that you do? So the first and most immediate thing that you want to do with every single person who donates to your organization is to immediately and personally say thank you. And this is for every single person. And I think this is a really important point to make about equity and fundraising. I am a strong believer that there should be no minimum donation that a person has to make in order to have that donation be acknowledged. We have no idea of knowing when we are the organization that's receiving a donation, whether that $10 or $15 or $20 donation was a small little afterthought drop in the bucket to the person, or whether that was something that they had to think about, plan for, budget for. This might be the only donation that they make to any organization all day on GiveNOLA Day or all year. We never know what it takes for any one individual person to make any one individual donation. So we really want to make sure that every single person who takes the time to give a donation of any amount to an organization that they care about has that gift personally and meaningfully acknowledged. Now, that might sound like a labor intensive proposition, and it is. You do have to really think about how are we going to set our organization up so that we can acknowledge every donation and also still kind of think about and be aware about the capacity of our organization to do all that thanking. So the good news is we have a little bit of time. People aren't going to actually start donating to your GiveNOLA Day campaign for another week. So you have the next 7 days to come up with a strategy to make sure that every donor who gives to your organization, that donation is acknowledged personally and sincerely. So before we get into the specifics of how you do that, let's talk about what we mean when we say a personal and sincere thank you. So rule number one of thanking your donors is that the tax receipt is not what we're talking about here. That is not a thank you. This is a rough depiction here of the automatic tax receipt that Greater New Orleans Foundation generously puts out to every single person who donates on GiveNOLA Day. So when somebody donates to your organization, immediately, like the minute after that, they are going to get in their email a receipt that looks like this. It comes automatically from Greater New Orleans Foundation. Really helpful for organizations that participate in GiveNOLA Day because it means that you don't have to then, spend a bunch of time scrambling to send those follow-up tax receipts to every one of your donors. So it just takes that to do off of your list. It does not mean that that takes the thanking off of your to-do list, because look at this tax receipt. How many people are going to look at this tax receipt and feel warm and fuzzy feelings about the organization that sent it to them? Pull a receipt out of your wallet right now. Do you feel warm and fuzzy about that cup of coffee that receipt represents? Probably not. So the tax receipt, I can't emphasize this enough, that's not a thank you. What we're talking about here is a personal acknowledgement of the donation from one person at your organization directly to the donor. This can be, it can take a lot of different forms. So this could be a phone call that somebody makes to that donor. It can be a personal email, not an auto-generated email, but, dear Kristen, I just saw that you made a donation to our organization on GiveNOLA Day. You'll get something more formal from us later, but in the meantime, I just wanted to let you know how grateful we are for your support. Sincerely, Executive Director, or whoever's sending that email. So a personal, not auto-generated email directly to that donor. It can be a handwritten thank you note. So I've heard of some people that send really wonderful thank you text messages. If it's somebody that they know and that they have a texting relationship with, a text message is great, but it's got to be something really personal from one person to the other person. In general, the magic window of time is 48 hours, and I encourage you to write that down. This is not my personal opinion. What the data shows is that when a donor receives a personal acknowledgement of their gift within 48 hours of their donation, they're 4 times more likely to give another donation to that same organization. So that should be strong motivation for all of us. Now, here's the other thing on GiveNOLA Day. One of the really, I think, very cool things about GiveNOLA Day is that you, as the nonprofit, automatically get an update every time somebody donates to your nonprofit. So there are some organizations that actually just spend the whole day, like they block that day out on their calendar, and that day is just for thanking donors. And every time somebody makes a donation, they don't wait until the next day. They don't wait 48 hours. They just send that email out immediately. Or maybe they block out, okay, at 9 a.m., 1 p.m., 5 p.m., and 10 p.m. We've got somebody who's sending out, a batch of acknowledgments to everybody who's donated in that, kind of previous window of time, but having some way that thank you happens even faster. Again, this is like your first opportunity with every one of those donors to make a really great impression. And again, what the data shows us is that when you do this, that person is a lot more likely statistically to consider giving to your organization again the next time you're asked. Remember those numbers that we looked at the beginning of the workshop, the back of the envelope math about the impact of that kind of donor retention. This is your first opportunity to really improve your donor retention numbers for the next time that you're asking people to give. So some things to consider when you're coming up with your thanking strategy for GiveNOLA Day. The first thing to really kind of consider is what is the fastest way that we can say thank you and still have it really feel sincere to the donor. And this is going to depend a lot on, like how well you know the people who are giving to your organization. Like I mentioned, text messaging is an option. Well, if it's somebody that you've never met before, text message might not feel like the most appropriate way. It's very fast for sure, but it might not feel like, a very sincere way to say thank you. So, you might want to have a strategy for if it's a first time donor or if it's somebody that, we recognize as somebody that this is kind of our first impression with them. Maybe that's a phone call. And maybe there are other donors that like we already have a texting relationship with them because it's somebody's friend or somebody's roommate or somebody's mom. And that person we can send a text message to because it is still going to feel really sincere. So what's the fastest way to say thank you that's both fast and that still feels sincere to the donor? The second thing is who recruited that donor and how can that person be involved in saying thank you? So, let's say that you are using this ambassador strategy that we have been talking about today, where you have board members or volunteers or other folks connected to your organization who are helping to amplify your GiveNOLA Day message. And so maybe you have a board member who they post information about giving to your nonprofit on GiveNOLA Day on their social media. Well, then, 10 of that board member's friends give to your organization on GiveNOLA Day. How can we make sure that that board member also says thank you to their donors? Because those donors, they do want to hear from your nonprofit. They also want to hear from the person who's representing that nonprofit who they know, because part of their motivation for giving is probably because they feel like they're doing something to support that friend of theirs who is asking them to give. So that means that you might need to have a strategy in place for making sure that anybody who's an ambassador to your organization on GiveNOLA Day can see who has made a donation so that they can follow up with those people to say thank you. You also want to think about what you need to do now, like in the next week, in order to be ready to say thank you when that very first person donates to your GiveNOLA campaign. And this slide used to say on May 4th, because that's GiveNOLA Day, but remember that online giving opens up a week from today on April 20th. So you really have to have your thanking strategy in place like this week, so that if somebody makes a donation at 12:01 a.m. on Tuesday, April 20th, you've already got your thanking strategy in place. So what I'm going to ask you now to pull back up your worksheet. And Kristen, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but if you're able to drop that file into the chat again, that way anybody who's joined us in the last couple of minutes, or if you've lost track of your worksheet, you can access that easily. So now we're going to go down just to that box in the lower right-hand corner. So this is the box that's just about thanking. And what I'm going to ask you to do here is think about what are the ways that your organization is going to say thank you immediately, personally, and sincerely anytime somebody donates to your organization around GiveNOLA Day. So you can see here, just in the example version, they've got that the executive director is going to send a thank you email within an hour of every donation. So they are actually like refreshing the back end button on their GiveNOLA account to see every time somebody donates. And so once an hour, they're thanking people from the previous hour. And then they're also including in that thank you, if it's an ambassador who they know recruited that donor, they're going to mention that person by name in the thank you. And then if that person is, again, recruited by an ambassador, the organization is also asking that ambassador to reach out to that person within 24 hours. And then as a sort of second round of thank yous, they're going to have the development committee members call every GiveNOLA donor within the week after GiveNOLA Day. So everybody is being thanked at least 2, if not 3 times by the executive director, by the person they know at the organization, if that's the person who recruited them, and by a development committee member who they might not personally know yet. So I'm not saying that your strategy has to look exactly like that. I'm just saying you got to have some kind of strategy. So we're going to take another pause here. I'm going to put on a little more music in the background. This one's going to be a little over 3 minutes that you have. And I want to ask everybody to think about, what is your thanking strategy going to be for all of your GiveNOLA donors? So we're going to stop the share. Everybody should have the worksheet. And again, you can feel free to turn down the volume and turn it back up in about 3 minutes if you're not interested in having music in the background.
Nobody but me.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And I'll just extend the same invitation and encouragement. If you have a way that you have started planning for thanking your GiveNOLA Day donors, I would love for you to share that in the chat so that folks can get other ideas from you. Even if you feel like it's something pretty simple and straightforward, I think it's always helpful for folks to hear from other organizations that are trying to navigate this process right now, and get ideas from what other folks are doing. So we're going to jump back over here and we're going to revisit that worksheet one more time before the end of the workshop. So please keep it close by. Don't close it out just yet. So what I want to do here before we move on to step number 5 in the donor cultivation cycle is just show a little bit about like what this looks like in real in the real world application of GiveNOLA Day. So you'll see these kind of characters revisited again a little bit later. So we've got 3 different people here. There's the ambassador for the organization, there's the prospective donor for the organization, and there is the staff member of the organization, either executive director or a development person. So those are the 3 people that you're going to see here. So first you have the ambassador, who has identified her friend as being a prospective donor to the organization. So she's calling him up and saying, would you consider giving $25 to this organization on GiveNOLA Day? And he's on it. So then an hour and a half later, you've got the person back at the office who is monitoring the back end of the GiveNOLA Day page and sees that Joe has made a $25 donation to the organization. So that let's assume that he's the development director. So the development director here is taking a minute to write a handwritten note to Joe to make sure that he is personally acknowledged within 48 hours of the donation. He's also sending an email to Alice, the ambassador, to let her know that her friend Joe has made a donation, which means that later that afternoon, she can also call him back and say, I just learned that you made a donation. Thank you so much. So Joe, that let's assume that he's a first-time donor to this organization. He's made a donation. He's gotten immediate acknowledgement from the ambassador, who he knows, his friend who recruited him to be a donor to this organization. And probably the next day or maybe the day after, he's going to get this personalized handwritten note in the mail from somebody at the organization also acknowledging the gift. So this is kind of the best practice here because we're making sure that the donor's gift is acknowledged right away. It doesn't matter that, for this organization, $25 might not be considered a major gift, but we don't know for that donor that $25 donation might be something really kind of thoughtful and meaningful for that person. And he's getting these 2 acknowledgments back to back to thank him for that gift. So coming up with the thank you plan, what we need to think about is how are you going to thank your donors? So in this case, that's Joe. Make sure that every one of those donors gets an acknowledgement. And then also we need to think about how are you going to be thanking your ambassadors? So if you have people who are reaching out to their own networks on behalf of your organization on GiveNOLA Day, probably pretty soon after GiveNOLA Day, you want to have some kind of acknowledgement that you give to them as well. Thank you so much for giving your time and lending your sort of your support to for this organization and using it to bring in new supporters. We're so glad to have you on the team. That's going to make Alice a lot more likely to want to be an ambassador again during your GiveNOLA Day 2022 campaign. So making sure that you're thanking her. And then you have to have the plan in place for how you're going to make that happen between now and again, really this time next Tuesday. So if you're going to be writing handwritten thank you notes, you have to have blank note cards, you have to have stamps, you have to have a way to get to the post office or the mailbox. You might want to have a kind of standard script that you're going to use in the note so that you don't have to come up with something completely original each time. If you're going to be making phone calls, you might want to have a script or some talking points. So you have this kind of opportunity over the next week or so to get the infrastructure in place so that when that first donation comes in on April 20th or soon thereafter, you've got you don't have to scramble to make the thank you strategy. You've already got all of the pieces in place, both for thanking your donors and for thanking your ambassadors. So then the fifth step, remember, in the donor cultivation cycle is to update your donors on the impact of their gift. And so this is really, I find for a lot of organizations, this is the really challenging part, because when you've got that 48-hour deadline for the personal thank you, that, that can kind of like light a fire in your belly a little bit. The meaningful updates, there's not quite that same immediate turnaround on the deadline. Now, there is research that shows that you have about 90 days from when a person makes a donation to the next time that they need to hear from your organization, not about giving, but just with an update on the impact of their gift. So that does give you a little bit of a framework to work with. So if we're looking at May 4th as for GiveNOLA Day, if we're using that kind of as our benchmark, 90 days, that's about 3 months. So that's May, June, July, August 4th. So sometime over the course of the summer, you've got to have some kind of update that goes out to your donors. So things to consider when you're thinking about your update. And again, I want to emphasize this update is not going to have anything remotely related to giving to your organization. This is just, here's what's been going on. Thank you again so much for your donation. So some things to consider here. The first thing is, how do your supporters best receive information? One thing that I find is that a lot of organizations really rely heavily on their mass email communication for this kind of updating with their supporters. So like an email newsletter or email updates, that really is, for a lot of organizations where they do most of this communicating. I find for a lot of those organizations that they're not taking into account how few people actually open those emails. And it's not to say anything about any of those organizations and like how great the quality of their email newsletters are. It's really more just about how much email most people get every day. So if you ever check your open rate on your emails, you might see that it's like, for most organizations, it's like 15 or 20% of the people who are on your email list that actually open your emails, which means that like 20% of the people, which means like 80% of the people who you think you're communicating with are not actually getting those communications from you. So that's not great. So you want to think about like, how do our supporters, how are they going to actually be able to receive these updates and this information that we get out there to them? So maybe thinking about, is it not just having email communication or just social media communication, but once or twice a year, could we make a phone call to all of our supporters? Could we have our board members do a thankathon, a phone bank, where they're not asking for anything, they're just calling to say, hey, thank you so much for being a supporter. Wanted to let you know we're getting ready for our fall programming. Here's what that's going to look like. Thanks again for being a part of it. Could you send something through the mail? Could you send a postcard? Or, once a year, could you have your newsletter be in hard copy and electronic copy? But what's the best kind of, mode of communication for your supporters to get this information from you? You have to balance that with what you have the capacity to do well. So I work mostly with really small organizations, and most of the organizations I work with, they're not going to have the capacity to churn out a hard copy mailing every single month. So you have to think about balancing, even if we know that our supporters want to get stuff from us in the mail every once in a while, we know that we're going to have to be really careful about thinking about when and how often we're doing that. And then what do you need to do now in order to be ready to update all of your GiveNOLA 2021 donors after they give and before you ask them to make their next donation? And remember that you've got that, now we're looking at a 90-day window. So sometime over the course of this summer, you need to have some kind of update that gets out to those people. So this could be a really good like May 5th activity. So GiveNOLA Day is May 4th. May 5th, maybe you take the morning off and then you get back to the office in the afternoon, or get back to your home office desk in the afternoon. And you use that afternoon to think about, okay, if we're going to have one like really significant touch point with our donors between now and the beginning of August, what does that look like? What's the information that we need to communicate, and how are we going to communicate it? So here's what that looks like. So you've got the same three people here again. So it's a month after GiveNOLA Day, and you've got Alice the ambassador who's calling up her friend Joe, And she has probably been prompted by the organization to do this. Maybe the executive director or the development director has asked all the ambassadors to make these phone calls. And she's saying, hey, thank you again for your donation. I just wanted to let you know there are 100 students who are joining the program this fall. And Joe over here says that's great. And he actually happens to be reading the newsletter update right now. And so he's getting these 2 updates back to back. Then 3 months after that, here is our development director back in the office again, who's reaching out to Joe. And he's again got another no ask, just an update. Thanks again for giving on GiveNOLA Day. Here are 5 things that are happening right now. Thanks so much for being a part of our community. So then he's also reaching out back out to Alice, the ambassador, and he's thanking Alice for being an ambassador, and he's sharing that same update with her. So we're not taking for granted the fact that Alice is totally bought into the organization and doesn't need any more kind of follow-up communication. He's also taking the time to make sure that she really feels like a valued part of the community too. And then 6 months after GiveNOLA Day, we've got the development director who is reaching back out to Joe and saying, thank you again for being a supporter. You know, we've been in touch over the course of last year. Will you consider a special year-end gift? And statistically speaking, Joe is now very likely going to give another donation. And remember, we talked at the beginning of the workshop about how only 20–25% of first-time donors give to the same organization again. If you get that same donor to give a second donation, the retention rate for a third gift jumps up to 60%. So some people call the second donation a golden donation because the kind of retention rate then becomes so much higher that time around. So if Alice and the development director have done a good enough job of keeping in touch with Joe, helping him to feel like a valued part of the organization and inspire him to give a second donation, it is now more likely than not that he's going to continue giving to that organization long term. It took thought, it took intention, it took strategy, but now you've got somebody who is really, very likely going to be committed to the organization longer term. So for a third and final time, I want to ask you to go back to that worksheet and go to the third box in the lower left-hand corner, down to that update section. And I'm going to ask you to think forward, think ahead a couple of months to future you, and think about what kind of updating strategy do you want to have in place for all of your GiveNOLA donors, and how do you want to be in touch with them between GiveNOLA Day and the next time you ask them to give. So in the sample here, you'll see they've got a mix of things. So the development director is going to send an update postcard that includes a handwritten note to every GiveNOLA donor on June 1st, so about a month after the donation. All of those ambassadors are going to forward the fall newsletter to the donors who they know. So that's a really nice stewardship update touch point. They're going to have the board do a telephone thankathon, no asking, just calling to say thank you and give a little bit of an update to all of their donors. And then in December, the development director is also going to send a year in review update to everybody. So this organization, they've got these 4 touch points here in between when the person made their GiveNOLA donation and the next time they're asked to give. And, this is in addition to maybe having an email newsletter or having regular social media updates that the person's receiving. They're also getting these sort of more planned out and intentional updates that are going directly to that person. So we're going to stop the share one more time. And I'm going to ask everybody to go back to the worksheet, and you can see it in your chat history here. If you're having trouble accessing it, please put that in the chat as well. Just go down to the bottom of your screen, click the chat bubble, and you can open that up there. And we're going to turn on one more song. This is going to be the longest music break that we have. So it's going to be about 4 minutes. So you have a little more time to think about your update. And again, if you want to turn down the volume, just make sure to turn it back up in about 4 minutes.
Daydreaming and I'm thinking of you. Daydreaming. your heart, share all of your love, till death do you part. I wanna be what he wants, when he wants it, and whenever he needs it. And when he's lonesome and feeling love starved, I'll be there to feed it. Loving him a little bit before he stays, turns me right on when I hear him say, hey baby, let's get away, let's go somewhere. Oh, baby, well, I don't care. Hey baby, let's get away, let's go somewhere. Oh, baby, well, I don't care. I wanna be what he wants, when he wants it, and whenever he needs it. When he's lonesome and feeling lost, I'll be there to feed him. Loving him a little before he stays. It turns me right on when I hear him say, hey baby, let's get away, let's go somewhere. Oh, baby, can we? Hey baby, let's get away, let's go somewhere. Oh, baby, can we? Well, I don't care. Hey baby, that I'm thinking of you. 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 Oh, God,
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for being so thoughtful with all of your responses there. And if you've got something that you're feeling really good about that you're going to use for updating your donors after GiveNOLA Day, please do put that in the chat so other people can get some inspiration from you. So in the 10 or so minutes that we have left, it looks like we've had two questions that have kind of already been answered, but we will circle back to the chat. Just a reminder again, if you have questions or comments that have come to mind for you, now is a great time to put those into the chat for while we're all still together today. So as you're thinking about your update plan, here are the things that I would encourage you to kind of keep in mind here. So the first thing is, how are you going to update, again, your donors? So that's people like Joe in our little kind of scenario there. How are you going to keep Joe and your other donors up to date? And remember that all of these communications, they're not about asking him to give again. You will do that eventually. But you want to get to the point where, again, by the time you ask Joe to make his next donation, it almost feels like more of a formality because he's been hearing so much from you. He's felt so much like a part of your organization's community that, you know, he's got that close connection there. You also want to think about how you're going to update your ambassadors. And in this scenario, that's Alice. So think ahead to future youth. Think about GiveNOLA Day 2022. Don't you want to have Alice still feel just as excited about reaching out to her network and encouraging people to support your organization on GiveNOLA Day? We can't take for granted the idea that our ambassadors, you know, we can like, I don't think there's ever a point where you can kind of like check somebody off the list like, oh, no, we've built a strong enough relationship with that person. We probably don't need to put any more effort into it. Instead, what we want to be thinking about is how can we continually be working to deepen and grow those relationships. So there's also got to be some kind of an update plan for your ambassadors. Now, it doesn't have to be super different. Remember in that last scenario, the update that the development director was sending to Joe is very similar to the one that he is also sending to Alice, right? So it's the same thing. Maybe for the ambassador, it's a little bit more personalized, or maybe there's a note in there that also says, you know, thanks so much for being a supporter. The 12 donors that you inspired to give during GiveNOLA Day are all, you know, now valued parts of our community. So it sort of acknowledges that extra type of work that she did, but it doesn't have to be radically different. It just has to be included and represented somewhere in there. And then you want to think about what are the steps that we need to take in order to prepare for those updates. So if you're going to be, let's say that you're thinking, oh, you know, a phone bank from our board, that's not something that's going to cost us any like postage money or anything like that. We can do it during a board meeting, so it's not going to require, you know, people giving extra time that they didn't already have set aside. But our board members have never done it before. So maybe one of the things that we need to do to prepare is start talking about it now so that they're kind of mentally prepared for this thing that you're asking them to do, you know, even if it's not that they're going to do it until like June or July or August. Or maybe one thing that we need to do is make sure that we have phone numbers for all of our donors, or that we have a script that people are ready to use when they're making those phone calls. What are the specific steps that we need to take in order to be set up for that kind of updating? So we've got a little under 10 minutes left. And so I want to take as much of that time as we can for questions. And I think Kristen might have some other kind of like wrap up housekeeping stuff. But I want to ask you, before we move to that part and you click the leave meeting button, I want to ask you to do two things. And this is actually kind of a personal practice that I've started incorporating over the last few years when I'm in any kind of professional development setting. You know, there's like so much information that you get over the course of 90 minutes. At least I hope that's your experience. I hope you're feeling like, wow, like I've gotten a lot from the last 90 minutes, but maybe it's also a little bit overwhelming. And so I find what often happens with me is I sort of like leave the session feeling really inspired. And then when I get back to my desk 15 minutes later, I'm like, I can't even remember what I'm supposed to be doing now. So a good trick that I have found for managing that is to take a minute before you even leave our session today to write down two things for yourself. The first is, what are your three biggest takeaways? In other words, if I remember nothing else about the last hour and a half that I've invested in this time, what are the things that I want to make sure that I remember? And the other thing is, what are my three immediate next steps? So in other words, if I do nothing else, or before I, you know, wrap up my work for today, or however you want to define this, what are the three very specific things that I'm going to do? I'm going to, you know, go online and buy postage stamps so that I have them for my thank you notes, or I'm going to reach out to three people who I think would be great ambassadors for my organization and make sure that we have a plan for working together. Whatever your three immediate next steps are. And as you're doing that, you can also, again, put questions or comments into the chat. And I also will share here on the slide, or second to last slide, all of my contact information. And I really want to reiterate that offer. If you feel like there's anything that you missed today, or if you have follow-up questions that you're not comfortable asking in the chat or anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. Email is usually the best way to reach me, but you've also got my phone number here. You've got the Funding Seeds website. You've got all of the GiveNOLA contact information as well. But I would really love to be a resource for you if you feel like there's anything else beyond what we have been able to cover today that you'd like to talk about a little bit further. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Kristen. If you want to share the upcoming learning opportunities at GNOF, and then maybe we can open up the chat and you can share questions that folks have put in there.
Sure. I'll go ahead and start with the learning opportunities since they're up on the screen. And I'm sorry for having trouble hearing me. It just started raining really hard outside of my house. So I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I'll talk louder. Anyway, we slow down a little bit for GiveNOLA Day when it comes to our workshops, but as you can tell from the screen, we pick right back up the week after GiveNOLA Day. We are doing a bunch of workshops around evaluation, and they will be happening every other week after GiveNOLA Day. So as you can see on the screen, we're doing an evaluation 101, We're doing equitable evaluation on May 26th. And then we're doing using public data on June 9th. And so it's kind of a whole evaluation series. You can take a session here or there, you can take all three. But we've heard a lot about nonprofits and writing grant reports and having to do evaluation pieces. And it seems like this is a piece where nonprofits struggle a bit. So this is our response to it. And I always like to do a little poll at the end, just to see how you guys were feeling about this session. So I'll go ahead and launch that. And you'll see that the poll is just 3 questions, all on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. So feel free to go ahead and submit your votes there. And your ratings. Once again, it's on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest about this session. And then we did get a question, Nora. I'll switch to Q&A while folks are voting. So y'all just have to vote and listen. We have a question that says, I'm all too familiar with the 20% open email rate. In the initial thank you email, would it be okay to say something like, be on the lookout for our monthly newsletter in your inbox for our latest updates on our community outreach and programming? That way, at least they know how we plan to regularly communicate with them.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You know, letting folks know how they can expect to hear from you is going to be really helpful for a lot of folks. In my experience, that doesn't drastically change the open rate. It just means that, you know, folks, when they get that first communication from you, they know that you're being sort of mindful of how you're going to be reaching out to them. But I think that's a great idea to make, you know, to make a point to say that in your first communication.
Great. And then we did have a question earlier about, and I'll address this one, but I just wanted folks that were still on the call to hear it, about seeing donations come in real time. As long as on your GiveNOLA Day profile that you have it set to say yes to receiving donation letters, you will get an email each time there is a donation. I know some users on your account may not want that. So, you know, if you have your executive director or a board member on there, they may not want 50 emails in a day for each donation that you've received. So you can put no for those folks that don't want it. But if you're the development director or the thanker, essentially, you can toggle that over to yes. So you can get those, and you can also download the spreadsheet from the donation information tab, and it'll be updated throughout the day as you get new donations. And you can also see if those donations come from a fundraising page or your regular profile page. So if you have a board member that's created a fundraising page or a volunteer, you know how that donor found you. So just wanted to say that piece as well. And I'll turn it back over to you, Nora, if there's anything you want to say in the next 60 seconds or so.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, both to Kristen and Ganaf and to everybody who participated in the workshop today. I'm really grateful that you chose to spend some time thinking about this. And again, Nora at thefundingseed.com, if you have any questions or comments that we didn't get to address today, I would love to hear from you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. And I'll give you that 60 seconds back. And we're finishing right on time. So go us, Nora. And I will be following up with the recording and deck later this afternoon. Have a great day, y'all, and stay dry if it's raining near you.
Thanks, everybody.